Do you remember those dreams God gave you? Dreams to do great things? Or have the ups and downs of life caused you to forget? Maybe one day they'll still come true.
Well, good morning. Thanks for being with us today. We're glad to have you here, whether you're joining us from our Greece campus, Irondequoit campus, Webster. Give a shout out to everyone in Webster, or those who might be joining us online. Great to have you here with us. My name is Nate. I'm our Webster campus pastor. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to kind of bring this series to a close that we've been in over the last 5 weeks. We've been talking about the life of Joseph and looking at the different seasons that God brought Joseph through. And hopefully you've been able to see that some of the seasons that Joseph went through in his life are some of the very same seasons we find ourselves going through in our lives here today. And so week 1, we looked at the season of trials. Week 2 was the season of temptation. Week 3 was the season of waiting. And then last week, Drew walked us through the season of provision. And so today, as I bring things to a close, I want to talk about the season of fulfillment. I want to talk about how God fulfills these dreams that he gave to Joseph when he was 17 years old and see how the whole picture kind of comes together. So hopefully you grabbed a program on your way in here. You'll notice on the back there's some notes. You can follow along as I speak. And I want to direct your attention actually to some letters that are at the top of your program. You'll see a bunch of letters in caps, and they're kind of all squished together. Those letters actually represent a sentence. I just removed the spaces in between that sentence. And here's what I want you to do. I just want you to take a moment, look at those letters, and try to determine what that sentence says. So go ahead and do that. Take a look at that. What you'll find is you really only have 2 options. You only got 2 options. Some of you may have determined, okay, this sentence says that God is nowhere. That's what the sentence says, God is nowhere. The other option, the second option is, some of you may have determined that it says no, it says God is now here. But those are your 2 choices, God is nowhere or God is now here. And let me just ask you a question. When you think about those 2 statements, you think about where you're at in your life right now. Honestly answer this question. Which one of those 2 statements do you find yourself leaning towards? God is nowhere or God is now here? Where are you at today? And I think all of us, if we're willing to be honest, we all kind of find ourselves living our lives somewhere in between these 2 statements. And what dictates where we lean or where we land are the circumstances of our lives oftentimes. Because when life is hard and it's difficult, right? Our marriage is on the ropes. He broke up with us, or with you. Your job just fell through, right? Life is hard. All of a sudden we begin to question or feel like God is nowhere to be found. But when life is good, things are going well, your marriage is going great, he asked you out, your job, you're thriving, you get that promotion, man, God is here, and I can feel it in a very real way that he is with me. And oftentimes what steers our lives are the circumstances of our lives, and they impact where we land when it comes to God is nowhere to God is now here. But when we find ourselves drifting towards the God is nowhere, I hope that these last 5 weeks have encouraged you to think about Joseph in those moments. When life gets hard, think about Joseph, because Joseph continued to come back to this truth that God was with him. In fact, that's been our theme. We've had like a series theme that we continue to come back on each and every week, and it's this, that no matter the season, God is with us. No matter the season, God is with us. And Joseph continued to believe that. He believed that God was with him and that God would one day fulfill his dreams. And so last week, we left off the story of Joseph, where he had this opportunity to come before Pharaoh and to interpret his dreams. It was in Genesis 41. I want to encourage you actually go ahead and turn there. Genesis 41. If you're using one of our Bibles at one of our campuses, you can find that on page 35. So Joseph has this opportunity. He comes before Pharaoh and he interprets his dreams. And he tells Pharaoh this, here's what your dreams mean. They mean that you're going to have 7 years of abundance, where it's going to be an amazing harvest, tons of crops. It's going to be just 7 years of abundance. But that's going to be followed up with 7 years of famine, where life's going to be really hard. There's going to be a drought and food will be sparse. So here's what you need to do. You need to take 5% of the annual harvest during the 7 years of abundance and store it away so that you'll be able to get through those 7 years of famine. So that's what Joseph tells Pharaoh, and then look at what Pharaoh's response is back to Joseph. He says this, Genesis 41, verse 39. He says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. We see here that in just a moment, in an instant, Joseph goes from prison to power. He goes from being in shackles in a prison cell to now being one of the most important men on the planet, second in charge over Egypt. And as we've seen, Joseph continued to believe that God was with him. He continued to believe that God would one day fulfill his dreams. And I think one of the character traits that stands out to me the most about Joseph was this unwavering confidence that he had. He had this unwavering confidence that God was with him. And we see that all throughout the seasons that God brought him through. And as we've been going through this series, there's actually been a question that's been rattling around in my mind. And I want to ask all of you it today, and it's this. What would you do? What would you do if you were absolutely confident that God was with you? What would you do? What would you do if you were absolutely confident that God was with you? My son Landon, he's 4 years old. And this summer, he learned how to ride his bike. And man, he loves riding his bike. And one of his favorite places to go ride his bike to is a local elementary school right outside of our neighborhood, and they have an amazing playground there. So he loves to ride his bike there and then play on the playground, and then we ride back. Well, one day, we as a family, we decided we're going to go. We got on our bikes, we went to the playground, and I was there with the kids, and I was kind of near Landon, but I wasn't focused in on him. And out of the corner of my eye, I kind of noticed he worked his way all the way to the highest platform at the playground. Again, I wasn't looking directly at him, but I was kind of near him when all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see Landon launching himself off of the highest platform, kind of in my direction. But in that moment, in that instant, I just lunged over and I just barely caught him before he would have hit the ground. And immediately I'm flustered. I'm like, Landon, what are you doing? Dad wasn't paying attention. You got to make sure Dad's looking at you, that I know that you're getting ready to jump. I was upset. I was frustrated. But in Landon's mind, in Landon's eyes, he was absolutely confident that Dad was going to catch him. Never once did he have this thought or fear enter his mind that Dad's going to miss me, that Dad's going to drop me, or that I could break my arm or hit the ground. Never once did that thought ever enter his mind. He had this confidence that I was going to catch him. He learned his lesson a week later when he tried that with Grandma, and Grandma didn't catch him. But don't worry, Landon is okay. He's finally figured things out. But in a similar way, Joseph had that confidence. He had that unwavering confidence that he knew that God was with him. And there were some points in Joseph's life where it must have been really difficult for him to hold on to that truth and to believe that God was there. There were many points where he probably looked around at his circumstances and said, man, God is nowhere to be found. But yet we see him continually come back to remember God was with him. And his story, it's like a good news, bad news roller coaster. A good thing would happen, a bad thing would happen. A good thing would happen, a bad thing. Remember at the beginning, 17 years old, he's given these dreams of being a great leader. That's good news. It's immediately followed with bad news. He's sold into slavery by his own family. But then good news. He becomes second in charge of Potiphar's house. That's great news, but that's followed by bad news. Then he's thrown into prison for something he never even did. But then that's followed by good news. He has an opportunity to come before Pharaoh and interpret his dream. So his story is like this up and down roller coaster. And remember, he was 17 years old when God gave him these dreams. And he had to wait many, many years later. Scholars would say it's estimated he was probably around 40 years old when Joseph saw the fulfillment of the dreams that God gave him when he was 17. 23 years he had to wait for those dreams to be fulfilled. But yet we see over and over again that Joseph understood that God is most powerfully present when he's most apparently absent. Joseph understood that God is most powerfully present even in those moments when it seems like he's nowhere, even when it seems like he's absent, that he's there, that he is working in his life and in our lives. He's at work in our lives in those moments when it seems as though he isn't there. He's working in our lives in a powerful way. And throughout this story, as we've been reading through Genesis, the text even tells us continually that God was with Joseph, that the Lord was with Joseph. One example of that, Genesis 39, verse 2, it tells us the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered in all that he did. But wait a minute, time out for a second. Wasn't Joseph thrown into a pit, but yet it's saying that God was with him? Yeah, that's right. But wait a minute. Wasn't he also sold into slavery, but yet it also is saying that God was with him? Yeah, no, that's right. Well, hold on. Wasn't he also thrown into prison for something he didn't even do, but yet it's saying God was with him? I don't know about you, but do any of you struggle with that a little bit? Because, and here's why. I think for many of us, many Christians or people who go to church regularly, you call yourself religious, I think we kind of work under this assumption, this general assumption that if God is with us, then things in life just go well, right? If God is with us, life is just kind of easy. If God is with me, then my finances are always up and to the right. If God is with me, I get to meet the dream guy, the dream girl. I'm going to be good at athletics. If God is with me, I won't get sick. I won't get cancer. If God is with me, my marriage is going to succeed. If God is with me, my kids will succeed. If God is with me, life is just easy, right? Well, I don't think that that's really what the Bible teaches us, is it? We see that eventually Joseph was able to look back on his life, and he was able to see how God was at work. And he was there in every moment of his life, and it made sense, and all the little pieces of Joseph's life began to come together. On your way in today, hopefully you received one of these puzzle pieces. I want you to grab that and just take a look at it for a second. And what you're holding is a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And the person next to you, they're also holding a piece of the very same puzzle. In fact, all across all of our campuses, you are all holding one piece of the same puzzle. And so here's what I want you to do. I just want you to go ahead and take a look at your puzzle piece and just tell the person next to you what you think the puzzle looks like. Right, okay, obviously that's nonsense, right? That's ridiculous. There's no way you can look at your one puzzle piece and determine what the full picture looks like, because you are only holding one small piece of something much larger. And look, if we could pull together all the puzzle pieces, yours, your neighbors, everyone across all of our campuses, if we could pull all the pieces together, you would see an amazing picture. A beautiful picture. Beautiful mountain ranges, high peaks. You would also see some valleys. You'll see some places that are barren, that it's just kind of nothing but rocks. You'll also see places that it's just a beautiful forest. You'll see a beautiful lake there, a dude celebrating with his arms up, his hike or his journey. It's a beautiful picture. But look, here's the point. You can't judge the beauty of a puzzle by any single piece. I can't either. I can't judge the beauty of a puzzle by any single piece. And look, that's not just a statement about like jigsaw puzzle theory. So like the next time you do a jigsaw puzzle, you'd be like, all right, don't let me forget, I can't judge the beauty of a puzzle by any single piece. No, this is a statement about life. And here's the reality, that when it comes to our lives, I can't judge the beauty of God's plan for my life by any single circumstance. I can't. And you can't either. We can't judge the beauty of God's plan for our lives by any single circumstance. And we see this in the story of Joseph in his life, that his life is like a bunch of different puzzle pieces. And some of those pieces were bright. They were amazing. They were beautiful, great times of blessing and joy. But then there were other times when that puzzle piece was difficult and it was hard and there were some sharp edges. And eventually Joseph was able to look back and realize that each moment of his life was like another piece of the puzzle that God was assembling and that God was pulling together to make an amazing picture. And look, the same is true for you and me today when it comes to our lives. And sometimes you find yourself holding a difficult piece. Maybe that's you right now, that piece represents something really hard. And you look at that piece and it's just black. It is completely black. And there's some sharp edges and you're wondering, how in the world is this going to fit into my story? For some of you, you look at that piece and you see beautiful colors. It's wonderful. Life is great. Life is amazing. But look, if I'm confident that God is with me, which this is what we've been talking about for the last 5 weeks, if I'm confident that God is with me, then I can trust Him to take the individual pieces of my life, the good ones, the bad ones, the really difficult ones, every single one of them, and create an amazing picture, a beautiful picture. And so what I want to do is we kind of look at the rest of Joseph's story. Here's what I want to do. If this is really true, if we really believe that God is with us, then there ought to be three things that should be true of our lives today. And that's what I want to talk about. If I'm confident that God is with me, then number one, the first is this: I will keep doing what's right even when things go wrong. We see this in the life of Joseph over and over again. And we have this tendency in our lives when things begin to fall apart, when life begins to unravel, we oftentimes tend to abandon God and abandon his principles. And we start to think like, man, after all, I've been going to church, I've been reading my Bible, I've been doing all of these things, but look where it's landed me. Look at the circumstances I find myself in. And so we abandon God and we try to seize control. We try to take control of the situation, think, okay, now I need to fix this. But yet Joseph, we continue to see him continuing to do what was right, even when things got tough. In your notes, there's some examples, some boxes there, of these situations that Joseph found himself in, the way he was tempted, but then we see the way that he responded. The first situation there, remember when Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers? What was the temptation there in that moment for Joseph? Well, the temptation was to give up, right? To throw in the towel, to be like, man, God, you gave me these dreams of being a great leader. Now here I find myself being sold into slavery. That was a temptation, but what was Joseph's response? No, he faithfully served Potiphar. He faithfully served the one who purchased him or bought him as a slave. We move a little bit further in his story, the second situation there. Remember when Joseph was seduced by Potiphar's wife? The text tells us that day after day, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph to get him to sleep with her. Well, what's the temptation? Well, it's to give in. I mean, after all, it's day after day. No one would find out. Remember, Joseph's family, they're like 260 miles away. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't figure this out. That was a temptation, but what was his response? No, his response was he refuses, and he runs away. He flees. We move a little bit further into Joseph's story when he finds himself before his brothers. So his brothers, this is during the time of the famine, and they have no food, but they hear that Egypt has all of this food stored up, and so they head to Egypt to seek out this grain and this food. They come before Joseph. They don't realize it's their brother, but Joseph realizes that, that this is his family. These are his brothers. So what's the temptation? The temptation for Joseph in this moment is, man, now is your chance, Joseph. Payback. Here's your chance to get even and to pay them back for the decades of hardship that they put you through. That was a temptation, but what was Joseph's response? No, he forgives. He forgives them and he makes that relationship right with his family, with his brothers. And I would suggest to you that in every one of these situations, Joseph's response was crucial. It was so important. And had he chosen to respond in the way in which he was tempted, the story of Joseph would have ended much differently than we'll see here in just a minute. His response was so important. And it would have changed the total course of his life if he would have responded in the way in which he was tempted. You'll notice in your notes there's an empty box. And that box is for you. And I want to encourage you to take some time today or tomorrow before your community group meets. And I want you to fill that in. What is that for you? What's the situation you're facing in life right now? How might you be tempted to respond? And then what is the way that you know God would want you to respond that would be pleasing and honoring to him? And I don't know what that looks like for you, but for some of you, the situation you find yourself in is a difficult marriage where your husband, your wife, they're not treating you the way that they should. They're not showing you the love and respect that they should. So how might you be tempted? Maybe to respond the very same way and say, fine, if you're going to treat me that way, I'm going to treat you that way. Or maybe even worse than that, maybe you're getting to the point now where you're like, I'm done. I'm no longer going to fight for my marriage, and I'm pursuing separation. I'm pursuing divorce. But what should your response be? Your response should be to faithfully love and serve your spouse, even if they're not returning that back to you. And as you do that, you're praying for God to change their heart. You're praying for God to restore your marriage. Maybe some of you find yourself in the situation where you've lost your job. You are without a job, and now it's coming up on a year, and you're still without a job. So what's the temptation? Maybe for you, it's to doubt God, to question his character, to question the plan that he has for your life. But what should your response be? Maybe for you is you need to continue to trust God, to know that he is in control. He has a plan for your life. And as you do, you work hard. You put your resume out there. You fill out those applications. You try to get those job interviews. But you continue to trust him. Maybe for some of you, right now the situation for you is the kids are a real challenge at home right now. And home life is hard. it's difficult, and you just find yourself all day long saying, hey, don't do that, don't do that, don't hit her, don't punch him, don't pinch, just stop, and it's chaos. And what's the temptation for you in that moment? Well, the temptation for you might be to just lash out at your kids, to respond in anger, to be impatient with them, to be harsh with them. Well, what should your response be? Your response should be patience. To be patient, to be consistent with them, to lovingly discipline them, and pray for God's help and strength. I don't know where you find yourself, but I would encourage you, fill that box out. This week in your community group, we're going to be getting together and we're going to be talking through what that situation is for each of us in our lives and how we can encourage one another, come alongside of one another, and pray for one another. But if I'm confident that God is with me, I will keep doing what's right even when things go wrong. Number 2, if I'm confident that God is with me, I will see my trials as a means of growth, not a reason for doubt. The story of Joseph, it was actually in the seasons of difficulty that those seasons really shaped him. Those seasons of difficulty really shaped him for one day becoming a great leader. You see, the years he spent as a slave, those weren't just wasted years. The years that Joseph spent in prison, those weren't just throwaway years. No, those were important pieces of Joseph's puzzle. They were very important. Those years were a crucial part of his character development, his leadership development. In fact, we see a pattern kind of surface 3 different times in the story of Joseph. This pattern where he would find himself in a difficult moment, but yet we look at his response, and what would Joseph do? Each time, he would faithfully serve. He would continue to serve, and as he would do that, he would gain influence. He would gain leadership. 3 times we see that. We see it back when he was in Potiphar's house, Genesis 39, verse 3. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. He finds himself as a slave. What does he do? He serves. He's faithful. And as he does that, he gains leadership and influence. We see it again when he was in prison, Genesis 39, verse 22. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. We also see it again when he was in the palace. We just read this passage. Remember when Joseph was before Pharaoh, Genesis 41, verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. You see the progression here? In each and every one of those examples, the skills that Joseph would need to eventually lead a nation, those skills were developed during the times when he was a slave. Those skills were developed during the times when he found himself behind bars as a prisoner. And you see that puzzle piece that you might be holding right now, or that you're holding right now, and it might represent some season of pain, a discouragement, a loss, whatever it might be. Oftentimes when we find ourselves in seasons of pain and discouragement, the first question we ask God is, God, why? Why me? Why now? Why this? Why, God, does this have to happen to me? And here's what I want to encourage you with today. I want to challenge you to ask a different question. Instead of asking God why, ask God what? God, what is it that you have for me? What is it that I can't miss? What is it that you're trying to teach me through this difficult circumstance in my life? I don't want to miss it. God, how can I grow through this difficult trial I find myself in? Instead of asking God to change your circumstances, ask God to use your circumstances to change you. And the idea here, it's this attitude or this posture towards God that just says, God, help me. This is hard. This is difficult. I need your help. But at the same time, God, I don't want to miss one moment of this suffering. And may you use this in my life to help me see, to help me grow and learn, to become more like your son, Jesus. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if we could just download character? That'd be awesome. If you just hop on Google, character, download character, and we get this file, and boop, all of a sudden now we have character. Wouldn't it be sweet if you could go to your doctor and say, hey, doc, could you prescribe the character pill for me? And he gives you that pill, you take that pill, and then all of a sudden now you have spiritual maturity. Right? Wouldn't it be great if it worked that way? The reality is that isn't how it works. And you might have a puzzle piece right now that's the most difficult thing you've ever faced in your life. But yet God might want to use that very thing to change you, to mold you in ways you never thought were possible. In fact, that puzzle piece, it's actually a necessary part of your puzzle, because without this puzzle piece, your puzzle's incomplete. There's some empty spots, there's some empty gaps, and God wants to use even the difficult moments in our lives to help us grow, to help us learn. We see that in Joseph's life. And if I'm confident that God is with me, I will see my trials as a means of growth, not a reason for doubt. And then finally, if I'm confident God is with me, I will rely on his sovereignty even in my adversity. Now that word sovereignty, that's kind of a big word, that's a churchy word. Some of you might even be scarred by that word. Oftentimes that, God's sovereignty can be used as like that spiritual Band-Aid when things get really hard in life. Like, oh, well, God is sovereign, so everything will work out fine. But God's sovereignty is a beautiful thing. It is an amazing thing, and it should give us incredible hope, incredible peace. When we say that God is sovereign, what that means is that God, he is the ruler of everything. He rules over the universe, and he is sovereign. He reigns over the circumstances of our lives, and he will always have the final word. And as I was thinking about, okay, how can I really illustrate God's sovereignty in a way that is easy to grab a hold of and memorable? And so I thought of this. How many of you across all of our campuses are familiar with the phrase, keep calm and carry on? Keep calm and carry on. It's kind of all over the place. It's all over social media. Well, you may not have recognized or known where this phrase comes from, but it actually comes from the days leading up to World War II. And during this time, Britain would oftentimes circulate posters all throughout the British Empire that would have a positive statement on them that would encourage and lift up the spirits and the hearts of the people of Britain. Well, this poster here actually never made it into the circulation. It never made it out. But it was recently discovered about 10 to 15 years ago when a bookkeeper was opening an old crate of books and he found this poster inside of it. And so he thought it was pretty cool, and so he framed it and he put it up in his shop. Well, people began to take notice of it, and they were like, man, that's a pretty cool picture. Could you make a copy of that, and could I buy it from you? So he started doing that. He started selling it, and now it's all over the place. It's on T-shirts. It's on coffee mugs, all over social media. But here's what's important. When you look at this picture, this sign, keep calm and carry on, you'll notice at the top there's a crown. And that crown is really, really important, because that would communicate to everyone in the British Empire that, look, there is a king, King George VI, and he is sovereign. He is reigning. He is ruling over you. And look, here's what he wants you to know. He wants you to know to keep calm and carry on. Everything's going to be okay. I'm thinking about you. I care for you. Everything's going to be okay. You see, as followers of Jesus, we know the one true King. And he is the one who reigns supreme over everything. And he reigns over the circumstances of our lives. And this could not be more clearly seen than in the final scene in the story of Joseph. We see this in Genesis 50. In fact, I would encourage you, flip a couple of pages over to Genesis 50. We see this in verses 15 through 20. Here we see the ultimate fulfillment of Joseph's dreams. We know that Jacob has just died. That's Joseph's father. At this point, too, we also know Joseph has revealed himself to his brothers. So his brothers now know who Joseph is and how powerful he is. And look at what happens in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. So we see Joseph's brothers throughout this whole story, they've only been thinking about themselves and trying to cover themselves. Verse 18, his brothers then came and they threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, do not or don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And then verse 20. Verse 20 is an amazing verse. Verse 20 actually really summarizes the entire story of Joseph. Verse 20 could actually summarize this entire series that we've been in. Look at what Joseph says. He says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph understood that God was sovereign, and he could take the worst of circumstances and do something amazing. And I think it's important to understand, Joseph was not trying to excuse what his brothers had done. It's not what Joseph is saying here. Joseph isn't trying to minimize their sin. But what Joseph is doing is he's declaring the fact that God was sovereign and that God was able to take even the worst things in life and use them to fulfill a greater purpose. And what was that greater purpose? What was the ultimate fulfillment of Joseph's dreams? It wasn't just that he became a great leader and was powerful and reigned, kind of over Egypt. That wasn't the ultimate fulfillment. The greater purpose was to preserve his family so that they could become the nation of Israel. And it was from that very nation that Jesus came, the Savior of the world. That's why we're here today worshiping him. That's why we can know God through faith in his son Jesus and his death on the cross for our sins, and why we can know with assurance that we can one day spend eternity with him. That was the ultimate fulfillment. That was the greater purpose. And Joseph understood that. He understood that God was sovereign even when things were difficult and hard in life. And if I'm confident that God is with me, I will rely on his sovereignty, even in my adversity. As we've been talking about the story of Joseph, throughout every season Joseph went through, Joseph understood that there is a God. And God is the one who holds the top of the puzzle box. And he will take all the pieces of our lives, the good ones, the bad ones, he will take all of them and he will take those pieces and he will assemble them into a beautiful picture, an amazing picture. And for some of us, we may not see that picture for many months, years, decades, maybe not even this side of eternity. Remember, for Joseph, it took him he was 17 years old, 40 when he saw them ultimately fulfilled. That's 23 years it took him to see those dreams fulfilled. For some of us, we'll have to wait even longer than that. So many things in our lives will only make sense when we're able to look backwards. But in the meantime, we have to keep looking forward and trusting God. And so as you think about that particular circumstance, that struggle that doesn't make sense right now, for now, believe that God is with you. Remember, you are not alone, and someday all of the pieces will fit together. And I want to just leave you with these verses from Revelation 21. Revelation 21 is just a beautiful, beautiful chapter of the Bible, and it paints this picture of a time when we will all stand before our Savior in eternity, where all the pieces of our lives, all the pieces of history will come together. And it says this, Revelation 21, verse 3, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. And he will dwell with them, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end.'" Whatever season you find yourself in today, whatever difficulty or circumstance that puzzle piece represents for you in your life today, remember you are not alone. Remember that God is with you, and remember he wants to take all the pieces of your life and fulfill something amazing in and through your life. Remember you're not alone. Remember that God is with you. Let me pray. God, thank you for the story of Joseph. Thank you for your word that gives us these examples that can help us navigate through the ebbs and flows of life, that can help us navigate through the different seasons that we experience. And I just pray, God, that this series would be helpful to everyone here. No matter where they find themselves, that they would remember, God, that you are with them, you love them, and you care for them, and you want to do something great and amazing in and through their lives for your glory. And so, God, I pray that you would give them that hope and confidence today. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.